She was still wearing the wedding dress when she walked into the tea house. Not because she had forgotten to change, not because she was in shock, though she was. She wore it because the dress was the only thing that belonged entirely to her in that moment. Paid for with her own money, chosen alone, altered by her own hands the week before. Everything else in that night had been taken from her. The dress, at least, no one had touched. The name on the reservation cards had read Nadia and Kenji. The flowers had been white peonies and pale branches of cherry blossom, chosen because someone on his mother's team had decided they looked elegant against dark skin. Nadia had learned to hear the insult inside the compliment. She had learned over 3 years to hear a great many things without flinching, but she had not been prepared for silence. Kenji had not come. Not late, not stumbling with apologies, not pale and nervous at the end of the aisle. He simply had not come. And when his uncle walked to the front of the room at 4:45 in the morning, the ceremony had been scheduled before dawn, as was the tradition for a private Shinto blessing, and delivered 12 words in Japanese that Nadia's translator rendered as, "Kenji sends his deepest regrets and asks for understanding." She had stood in the center of the room in her dress and felt something she had never felt before. Not grief, not rage, erasure, complete and absolute, as if she had never been there at all. If you are watching this for the first time, stay with me, because what happens next is not the story you think it is. This is not a story about heartbreak. And before we go further, if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, do it right now. Hit that button, because this story ends in a place no one sees coming, and you are going to want to be there when it arrives. Nadia Osei was 31 years old, British Ghanaian, and one of the most quietly respected forensic art restorers working in East Asia. She did not restore art in the way that most people imagined, the gentle brushwork, the careful cleaning of centuries from a canvas. She was brought in when provenance was in question, when a piece needed to be traced backward through time, through ownership, through hands that had not always been clean. She could look at a bronze figure and tell you within 2 decades when it had been cast. She could read the corrosion pattern of a stolen Benin head the way a physician reads a scar. Her work lived in the space between history and law, and she was, by every measure, exceptional at it. She had met Kenji Mori at a gallery opening in London 3 years earlier. He was elegant, careful. He laughed at precisely the right moments and asked questions that suggested he was actually listening. He was also the son of one of the oldest art-dealing families in Japan, a man with access to pieces that moved across borders in ways that were technically legal and practically untraceable. Nadia had told herself that was not why she found him compelling. She had told herself this often enough that she almost believed it. She had come to Kyoto for love. She understood, standing in the pre-dawn cold outside the ceremony venue, that she had also come to Kyoto to be used. She just did not yet know the full shape of how. The streets at 4 in the morning in the older quarters of Kyoto are not empty. They are simply quiet in a different register. Lanterns still burn above certain doorways. The smell of wood and incense and something older, stone and water, comes up through the narrow lanes in a way that makes you feel simultaneously very small and very awake. Nadia walked without direction. Her shoes were inappropriate for walking. She took them off and carried them, feeling the stone beneath her feet. She found the tea house because a light was on. That was the only reason. A warm amber rectangle in a paper screen, visible from the end of a lane so narrow 2 people could not have passed each other without turning sideways. She had not planned to go in. She was not cold enough to need shelter, not thirsty enough to need tea. But the light looked like something she had not seen in several hours, evidence that somewhere, something was still functioning normally. She pushed open the door. The man sitting at the low table was not a customer. He had the particular stillness of someone who owned a room without requiring it to acknowledge him. He was perhaps 40, though he looked both younger and older than that depending on the angle. His jacket was expensive, and his hands were folded on the table in front of a cup of tea he had clearly not been drinking. He was looking at her when she entered, which meant he had heard her before she arrived. She noticed all of this in the time it took her to stop moving. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said in English, "You are not who I expected." "I am not who anyone expected tonight," Nadia said, "including myself." She sat down. This surprised her, that she sat. She was not the kind of person who sat at the tables of strangers in the middle of the night without an introduction. She was, in fact, the kind of person who read the room carefully, who timed her movements, who knew how to remain invisible in spaces that did not quite want her. But the dress was heavy, and the stone had been cold, and something in her had run out of the particular fuel required for caution. The man poured her tea. She watched his hands. They were not the hands of a person who spent his life behind a desk. She noted this the way she noted everything, catalogued it, filed it, assigned it provisional meaning. "You were at a wedding," he said. It was not a question. "I was supposed to be at a wedding," she said. There was a distinction, as it turned out. He looked at her for a moment, with something that was not pity and not curiosity exactly, something more calibrated than either. "Kenji Mori," he said. She went very still. "You know him," she said. "I know everyone in this city who moves art," the man said, "and several people who move things that are not quite art." His name, he told her eventually, was Ryusei Takeda. She knew it before he said it. Not because she knew him personally, she did not, but because she had seen it in documents, attached to acquisition records, to shipping manifests, to the kind of paperwork that looked legitimate on its surface and revealed its true nature only if you knew what you were looking for. Ryusei Takeda was the most powerful Yakuza boss operating in the Kansai cultural world, and he was known in her professional circles not as a criminal, but as a collector, a man with an extraordinary eye and no particular interest in where pieces had come from before they reached him. She should have left. She knew this. Every professional instinct and every practical warning she had ever received about the world she worked adjacent to said, "Stand up, thank him for the tea, walk back to the hotel, call your flight home." She did not stand up, because Ryusei Takeda was looking at her as if he already knew precisely who she was, and because she understood in the way she understood corrosion patterns and casting marks that this man had not been surprised to see her, that the light in the window had not been an accident. "You knew," she said, quietly, as a statement, not an accusation. She was too tired for accusation. "About Kenji, tonight." Something passed across his face, not guilt, not confirmation, something more precise than either. "I knew that you were being asked to be somewhere you would not ultimately be wanted," he said. "I was interested to see whether you would understand that before or after you arrived. And now that you know the answer." "Now," Ryusei said, "I have a proposal, which is a poor word for the evening you have had, and I am aware of that. But I find directness saves a great deal of time when the night is already as complicated as this one." She looked at him. He was precise in the way that very dangerous people sometimes are. Not sharp exactly, but exact, as if every word had been selected from a longer list and the discarded words had been worth considering. "Tell me about the Osei bronze first," she said. The silence that followed lasted long enough that the tea stopped steaming. Nadia's father, Dr. Emmanuel Osei, had spent 22 years as a curator of African antiquities at a museum in Accra. He had died when Nadia was 19, and he had died knowing that a particular bronze, a Yoruba messenger figure, cast approximately 400 years ago, removed from its original context during the colonial period and transferred through a chain of hands that crossed 3 continents, had been acquired by a private collector in Osaka through a transaction that predated any international repatriation framework. He had spent the last years of his life trying to trace it through legitimate channels. He had failed. The documentation was too thin, the chain of title too deliberately obscured. Nadia had spent 7 years picking up where he left off, and the documentation was not thin. It had been hidden. Specifically, it had been hidden within the acquisition records of Mori Art Consulting, which was Kenji's family firm, which had brokered the original sale. She had known this for 14 months. She had continued the relationship. She told herself it was because she loved Kenji. She had told herself this often enough. She was no longer telling herself anything. "You know about my father's work," she said. "Not a question now either. I know that the piece your father spent his life trying to trace currently sits in a private collection I have a particular relationship with," Ryusei said. "I know that the Mori family became aware of your research approximately 8 months ago. I know that what happened tonight at 4:45 in the morning was not Kenji Mori losing his nerve. It was Kenji Mori protecting his family's interests." The room was very quiet. Nadia heard her own breathing. "He never loved me," she said. And it was strange, because she had thought saying it would feel like falling, and instead it felt like something unlatching, like a door she had been leaning against for 3 years, suddenly opening on its own and leaving her standing upright without anything to push against. "I cannot speak to that," Ryusei said. "Human sentiment is outside the scope of what I track." Despite everything, something almost like a laugh moved through her. "What is within your scope?" "Leverage," he said. "And the return of things that were taken." And this is where you need to stay with me, because right here, at this exact point in the night, is where the story becomes something other than what either of them expected it to be. Hit like if you're still with me, because we are only halfway through this night. And what happens next changes everything about how you understand both of them. Ryusei Takeda's proposal was not what she had assumed it would be. She had assumed, because she was a practical woman and because the geography of power in that room was legible to her, that he would offer her something transactional and personal, protection in exchange for proximity, safety dressed as partnership. She had prepared herself to decline it clearly and without drama. He did not offer her that. What he offered was this. He would facilitate the legal transfer of the Osei bronze to the Ghanaian National Museum. He had the documentation to complete the chain of title. He had the relationships with the private collector, a man who had, it turned out, grown uncomfortable holding the peace as international repatriation law had sharpened in recent years and had been looking for an exit that did not expose him publicly. Ryusei had been holding this negotiation in suspension for 4 months, waiting for one thing, the provenance research that would make the transfer unimpeachable. Research that existed, fully completed, in Nadia's possession. "You need my records," she said. "I need your expertise and your authorization to present those records under your professional signature," he said. "Without that, the transfer is a favor. With it, it is a restitution. The distinction matters for what comes after." She studied him. "And what do you receive?" she asked. "You do not do this without a return." "I receive the resolution of a negotiation that has occupied me for 4 months and the goodwill of a collector who will owe me significantly for a clean exit," he said. "And I receive whatever it is worth to me personally to have returned something that should not have been taken." She did not ask him why he cared. She was not sure yet that she believed he did. But she noticed that he had said it, that it was worth something to him personally, and she filed that away with the other things she was still cataloguing about him. "You planned this," she said. "Not just tonight. You planned to be here. You knew Kenji would leave me. You knew I would be walking these streets." Ryusei was quiet for a moment. "I knew that you had been placed in a position designed to disorient you," he said. "I knew that if Kenji Mori removed himself from the equation, you would no longer have a reason to protect his family's interests. I was interested in what you would do with that freedom. You were testing me. I was observing you," he said. "There is a difference. I did not engineer your loss. I anticipated it. And I waited to see whether you would walk out of that room or stay in it. And if I had stayed," he considered this, "then you would not have been someone whose professional signature meant anything," he said, "and I would have had tea alone." Outside, the sky had begun to do the thing it does before dawn truly arrives, not lightning exactly, but becoming less certain of its darkness. A threshold color. The paper screen glowed with it in a way that made the room feel like it was being held between 2 different versions of the day. Nadia looked at her hands. She had touched Kenji's face with those hands. She had sat in his family's home and eaten meals she had not always known how to name, and smiled at his mother's careful, measured politeness, and told herself that love required this, required shrinking into the available space. She had been good at that. She had been practicing shrinking since long before Kenji. Her father had not been a small man, not in body, not in ambition, not in the scope of what he believed art owed to the people it had been taken from. He had believed that restitution was not charity, it was correction, a moral reckoning. And he had spent his life in rooms where no one quite wanted to hear that, nodding carefully, asking the right questions, building the case brick by careful brick. He had not lived to see it answered. She thought about that, about what it would mean to place the documentation in front of this man and watch the chain of title complete itself, about standing in a room in Accra, or watching remotely, at a distance, in the way that so much of her work happened at a distance, and seeing the bronze returned to a context that could actually hold it. She thought about what it would cost her, not professionally. Professionally, it would make her career immovable. A restitution of that scale, documented under her signature, would put her name in the conversation in a way nothing else could. She thought about the other cost, the one she had been told, in small ways and large ones, her entire life was the cost of ambition in a body like hers, in a name like hers, in a world that required her to be grateful for the room she was given, rather than clear-eyed about the room she had built herself. She looked at Ryusei Takeda. "If I do this," she said, "it is because of my father. It is because of what the bronze means, and what the record shows and what the transfer will accomplish. It has nothing to do with Kenji Mori or whatever satisfaction might be available from using his rival to correct his family's mistake." "I understand that," Ryusei said. I need you to understand it, actually, she said. Not as a formality. I need you to understand that I am not doing this because I am angry and available and willing to be useful. I am doing this because it is the right ending to work my father started and that I finished. And if the way I feel about you at the end of it changes, that will be a separate thing entirely. The last sentence surprised her. She had not planned to say it, but it was true, and she had run out of reasons to manage what was true. Ryusei looked at her for a long moment. I understand, he said, and the word had a different weight than the last time. The paperwork took until dawn. Ryusei had the documents. Nadia had her research files in a cloud archive accessible from her phone. The collector's legal representative was reachable by 6 in the morning Osaka time. Ryusei made the call with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew he would be answered. The language of the transfer agreement was precise, which she required. It named the provenance, the original context, the breach of original acquisition, and the institutional destination. When she signed her name at the bottom, her hand was steady. The sky outside was fully light by then. Pink, and then gold, and then the particular clear pale blue of a Kyoto morning that makes you feel like the world has been rinsed clean of everything it was before. They stood outside the tea house on the narrow stone lane, Nadia still in the wedding dress, which she had forgotten to think about for the past several hours. Ryusei with his jacket folded over one arm, looking precisely as composed as he had at 4 in the morning, which she no longer found irritating. What happens now, she said, to herself as much as to him. For the bronze, he said, the collector's team will arrange transport within 30 days. Your signature initiates the formal repatriation process. Your name will be on the documentation. And for the rest of it, he looked at her, and for the first time since she had walked through the door of the tea house, something in his face shifted into a register she had not seen yet, something less precise, less calibrated, something that had not been selected from a list. I do not know, he said. That is an honest answer. I appreciate honest answers, she said. I know, he said. I have been watching you work all night. She almost smiled. That is a strange way to describe what happened. It is what it was, he said. She looked at him. She thought about her father, who had been a man of extraordinary patience and extraordinary stubbornness, and had believed until his last year that the right answer, applied consistently and with sufficient documentation, would eventually find its way into the right room. She thought about how long it had taken. She thought about what it felt like to have finished something he had started, not because someone had given her access to it, but because she had built the case until it was unignorable. She thought about the wedding dress. I need to go back to the hotel and change, she said. Yes, he said. And then I need to call the museum in Accra. Yes. And then, she said, and paused. She did not finish the sentence. He did not ask her to. Some things are not conclusions. Some things are doors. And the particular quality of a door, the one that matters, the one that is genuinely new, is that you choose to walk through it when you are ready, not when someone else decides the timing is right. Nadia Osei had been left at the altar in the hour before sunrise. She had walked out into a city she did not entirely know and found, in a room that was not hers, a negotiation she had not expected. She had not been rescued. She had not been claimed. She had not allowed herself to be redirected from her own story into someone else's. She had finished the work her father had spent his life beginning. She had signed her name to a truth that had been buried for too many years under the paperwork of people who preferred it buried, and she had looked at a man who had positioned himself carefully at the edge of her life and decided that whatever that meant, she would be the one to decide what it became. That is not a small thing. It is not actually a small thing at all. Before you go, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever walked out of a room that was not ready for you, only to realize that the walking out was the beginning of something? I want to read what you write. And if this story reached something real in you today, share it, because someone in your life needs to hear this one. Subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you in the next story, which is already waiting. Nadia did not look back as she walked down the stone lane, not because the past was not worth seeing, but because the morning was very clear and very new, and she had things to do in it that required her full attention. The dress caught the light as she walked, white, paid for with her own money, altered by her own hands, still hers entirely, no matter what the night had tried to do with it. She had worn it to a wedding and walked out of a waiting room and into the rest of her life before the sun had finished rising. That, she thought, would have to be enough for now. And somehow, in the particular way that things are enough when they are honest, it was.